It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, Matt Hancock hits back at Dominic Cummings at the COVID inquiry. The former Health Secretary says Boris Johnson's chief advisor created a culture of fear in Downing Street, excluded ministers from meetings and tried to grab power from the Prime Minister. Well, in a week where the hearings have been dominated by politics, tonight I'll be speaking to the Secretary of the COVID inquiry, who says ordinary people have the most important role to play. Also tonight, an amazing musician and artist. Tributes to the Pogues singer Shane McGowan, who has died at the age of 65. We get exclusive access to a Just Stop Oil training session as new recruits are put through their paces before taking to the streets. And is this the UK's worst Christmas tree? We'll go live to Hattersley in Greater Manchester, where the council has been forced to act after residents complained. All that to come and much more on the UK Tonight. First tonight, former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has denied lying to colleagues during the COVID pandemic and hit out at what he called a toxic culture in government. Appearing at the COVID inquiry today, Mr Hancock called Dominic Cummings a malign actor who tried to grab power from the Prime Minister. And he insisted that he was the man who tried to get colleagues to take the outbreak seriously. Our political editor, Beth Rigby, has this report.
A discredited former health secretary, accused of incompetence, dishonesty and ultimately being responsible for the death of thousands.
Do you like your way through COVID, Mr Hancock?
Arriving at the COVID inquiry today to defend his record, his reputation and remonstrate with his critics.
The truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Matt Hancock's been accused of misleading the Cabinet about the plans in place to deal with the pandemic, today seeking to recast himself as the driving force wanting to curtail COVID in early 2020.
We were trying to effectively raise the alarm. We were trying to wake up Whitehall to the scale of the problem. And this was a problem that couldn't be addressed only from the Health Department.
The former Health Secretary also claimed he urged the PM to lock the country down on March 13th, 10 days before the first lockdown began. But he failed to provide a shred of evidence.
In that email on the 13th of March, to which you wish us to have regard, do you use the word immediate or lockdown?
I don't have it in front of me.
Do you use the word immediate or lockdown?
I don't have it in front of me.
Accusations of dishonesty have plagued Mr Hancock throughout this inquiry.
Mr Cummings, Sir Patrick Vallance in his diaries, Helen McNamara have made reference to you lying.
I was not. You will note that there's no evidence from anybody who I worked with in the department or the health system who supported that. Those false allegations.
Denying he lied, Mr Hancock instead sought to shift blame onto a toxic number 10.
I think, unfortunately, the lesson for the future is systems need to be in place so that if there is a malign actor in number 10...
Do you mean Mr Cummings?
Well, in this case, that was the example, but there may be in the future. But if there are people whose behaviour is unprofessional, the system needs to be able to work despite that.
Outside, bereaved families clear who they blame.
It's especially difficult for me to hear the testimony of Matt Hancock. It was under his watch that my husband died. He was in charge of the care homes. He was dead because of the inadequacies of the health secretary. So my feelings toward him are not warm.
Matt Hancock's appearance today is unlikely to change many minds over his competence and conduct as Home Secretary during the pandemic, because his account was less about self-reflection and much more about self-protection, as he sought to use the testimony to defend his record, deny accusations made against him and deflect blame for mistakes away from himself and onto others in Whitehall and number 10. And for the families who lost loved ones, not much closure to be found in Matt Hancock's account. This a day that's raised more questions than it answered. Beth Rigby, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, during his evidence to the inquiry today, Matt Hancock admitted that a protective ring had not been placed around care homes. That was the phrase Mr Hancock famously used in Parliament in May 2020, when telling MPs that measures had been taken to protect social care. Our People and Politics correspondent, Nick Martin, has spent weeks inside care homes. He spent them during the pandemic, and he now has this report today from Sheffield.
New Field Care Home in Sheffield at the peak of the outbreak.
How are you?
COVID was spreading fast from room to room and residents were dying. Facing accusations that the NHS was being prioritised over the care sector, the then Health Secretary Matt Hancock made this bold claim.
Right from the start, we've tried to throw a protective ring around our care homes.
That claim has haunted Mr Hancock ever since.
Because that's not how it felt in this care home and thousands of others. At the time, I witnessed for myself a lack of PPE, a shortage of tests for staff, and I also saw patients discharged from hospital into care homes without tests.
Giving evidence at the COVID inquiry, Matt Hancock was asked about his claim.
However you describe the protective processes you put in place around the care sector, they did not form an unbroken circle, did they?
It is quite clear from the evidence that Professor Van Tam is right.
You said we absolutely did throw a protective ring around social care.
Care home owner Nicola Richards was crying out for help as early as March 2020.
It's incredibly raw to me to watch that and hear what he's got to say, but we knew that anyway. We knew that at the time, that the words he was saying, they were just empty words. He was standing publicly and saying this when we knew it just wasn't true, it were lies.
What do you want this inquiry to learn to ensure that the same thing doesn't happen again?
I think lessons need to be learned. We should have been given the protection that we absolutely deserved, and for me, they've failed the most vulnerable.
Care homes were promised protection, but in so many cases it came too late. Thousands of care home residents likely paid for that delay with their lives. Nick Martin, Sky News, Sheffield.
Well, it was inevitable that the government's response to the pandemic, the performance of ministers and the clashes between personalities within government would be a huge part of this COVID inquiry. But the team working on the inquiry, led by Baroness Hallett, wants to hear the stories and experiences of ordinary people. And the COVID-bereaved families group says it is those voices, rather than those of politicians, that should be amplified. Earlier, I spoke to Ben Connor, the secretary of the COVID inquiry, and Ondine Sherwood, co-founder of the Long COVID SOS group. I began by asking Ben when we'll find out what the lessons are from the pandemic.
Some public inquiries drag on and on for years, and this is a huge public inquiry, but the chair, Baroness Hallett, has been clear from the outset she's not going to let this one drag on. She's also said that she is going to publish reports as she goes along, so that any lessons that need to be learned quickly or any recommendations that are especially urgent can be put in place as soon as possible.
How do you think it's going so far?
I think it's going really well. We've heard from a lot of senior politicians, scientists, advisors to the government over the course of the pandemic. And the hearings have already established a lot of new information, I think. But the other element of the inquiry, which is really important, is every story matters. That's the way that people across the country can contribute to the inquiry, can help the inquiry to build a real picture of the pandemic right across the UK.
Ondine, talk to us about your experience and what you wanted to get put down in evidence, a matter of record.
Right, so my experience was that I didn't recover from COVID. It was a mild infection in March 2020. And I thought, well, there's something wrong with me. Why am I not shaking off this virus? Why does it keep coming back? And when I eventually joined a support group, I discovered that there were thousands of other people who weren't recovering. It became obvious that something had to be done because throughout the pandemic, it's always been measured by deaths and hospitalisations, which I suppose are easier to count. But the fact that people weren't recovering was never a metric of the pandemic. It was never discussed really very rarely discussed, if ever, in the government briefings. And it was not counted for quite a long time. It's been extremely frustrating for people with long COVID that they've been ignored. And a lot of people still don't even know it exists.
We've heard that in some of the evidence of the inquiry so far. You call it scepticism at the heart of government, including the Prime Minister, who didn't really think long COVID was a thing. Obviously, you know, we're here to learn lessons and we're finding out so much more about long COVID now. What do you want to come from this inquiry in terms of supporting the thousands, as you said, who are living with long COVID? This is a legacy of the pandemic for them, and they now have to live with this, and they don't know how long for.
No, exactly, and it's millions. And we are still in the very early stages of research. Certainly in the UK, we need a lot more research into treatments and into why it happens. Why do some people get it and not others? Our charity fights for recognition, research and rehabilitation. And even 3.5 years down the line, we are still fighting for recognition. And I hope that this inquiry and the results will help with recognition, that we are the enduring result of the pandemic. And people are still living in the pandemic, because if you have long COVID, first of all, people are still getting long COVID because it's still... COVID is still around.
In amongst us, yeah.
Yes, and so people are still developing long COVID. And for people who have long COVID, it's very difficult to go back to normal life, even if they're physically able, because a reinfection can really set them back. We don't even know how much COVID is circulating at the moment, but there's certainly quite a bit of it.
Ben, when this inquiry does come to an end, as you said, we're hoping that the report conclusions are swift. We have been promised that it won't drag on for years. What do you want to have achieved? What do you want to be the end results for people?
We need the UK to be in as good a position next time a pandemic hits, and that's one of the key aims for the inquiry, clearly. But the other thing that's really important to the chair, Baroness Haller, is listening to people, learning about the human impact of the pandemic and putting that front and centre of her recommendations. That's what Every Story Matters is there to do. It runs alongside the hearings and the evidence that we hear from politicians and scientists, and it gives everyone a chance to contribute to a better understanding of the impact that the pandemic had and what could be done differently in future.
In other news, the royal family are considering their options. This is after 2 members of the family were named in a new book about Harry and Meghan, which alleged that they had raised concerns about the colour of Archie's skin before he was born. The names were published in the Dutch translation of this book, which was hastily removed from shelves on the same day it went on sale. The author today denied being part of a stunt to sell more books. Our royal correspondent Laura Bundock has the story.
This is what the King wants to focus on, the COP climate conference, but casting a shadow over the hellos and high-ranking handshakes are headlines he'd rather ignore.
How are you? I'm all right, thank you very much, just about.
His burden being head of a family now considering legal action over a book which names those accused in a royal race row. The book's author doubling down on his denial he'd included names.
I had never submitted a book that had their names in it, so I can only talk about my version. I'm obviously frustrated. The reality is, though, is that this is information that is not privy just to me. Journalists across Fleet Street have known those names for a long time. We've all followed a certain code of conduct when it comes to talking about it.
But that's rejected by journalists who followed Harry and Meghan. They heard names, but insist they never saw evidence to publish in print.
The only defence to defamation is truth. So you have to be able to prove what you're saying. So his thesis that all of Fleet Street knew and just didn't say it because we're all client journalists and just complicit is rubbish. 1, you have to have proof with what you're saying. And 2, you have to be absolutely sure about what you're saying. These are very, very damaging allegations.
Well, Harry and Meghan have never provided any evidence for that highly incendiary claim.
Some have plenty to say about the royals named, Piers Morgan broadcasting their identities. There's been silence from the Sussexes And as for the working royals, they're carrying on. Buckingham Palace say they're considering all options, well aware there isn't an easy option as to what comes next. Laura Bundock, Sky News.
Shane MacGowan, the lead singer of the Pogues, has died at the age of 65.
Oh, happy Christmas. I love you, baby.
Born in Kent on Christmas Day to Irish parents, he is perhaps best known for the band's Christmas favourite fairy tale of New York. He would have celebrated his 66th birthday this Christmas Day. Paying tribute to MacGowan, the Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar said his songs beautifully captured the Irish experience, especially the experience of being Irish abroad. Shane MacGowan's biographer Richard Balls joins me now from Norwich. Richard, thank you so much for joining us on the UK Tonight to talk about the man and the legacy of Shane MacGowan. How are you feeling about the news today as it sinks in?
I feel very flat, really, and terribly sad, particularly for Siobhan, Shane's sister, and Maurice, his father, who's in his 90s, and also the friends and former bandmates of Shane. I mean, we've obviously known for a long time that he's been in very poor health, and in fact, Shane had been in hospital for a number of months leading up to his passing. But it's still very, very sad. He was a lovely, lovely man, very genuine, a real humanitarian, and it's desperately sad.
What was it about his music that was so special? We just, read out the comment from Leo Varadkar there saying that he really captured the Irish experience, and it was a real blend of Irish folk music and the punk explosion that, he witnessed.
Yeah, I mean, Shane did something quite extraordinary that would never have occurred to anybody else, and that was to kind of hotwire, to jump into pop music's car and kind of hotwire, old Irish traditional music with punk. I mean, that probably seemed the most natural thing in the world to him. But I think your point about the Irish experience is critical. I mean, the Pogues really couldn't have come from Ireland. The whole point really is that they were a London-based band, and the prism through which Shane wrote his lyrics was as an Irish person being brought up in England. A lot of Irish people at that time particularly had a kind of conflicted identity. You're living in England, but you're not born in England. You're from an Irish family, and then he made these visits across to see his mother's family in Tipperary. So he was kind of living these two lives, and so he lived the experience of the Irish emigrant, and that's why we saw songs like Fairy Tale of New York and The Old Main Drag and lots of the other songs, lots of the songs were about London, and that's where Shane was living, and he lived the experience of the Irish emigrant.
Richard, what was it like being his biographer? I think you once compared interviewing him to making a wildlife documentary.
Yeah, I mean, probably the most difficult interviewing conditions that anyone could ever imagine. Shane hated talking about anything really. Well, certainly not his work. Hated being interviewed, distrust of the press, and so on. I interviewed him, but I say interviewed in the loosest possible sense of the word. More just sitting with him. In his flat. I mean, I was staying there sometimes and just spending days and days with him and his friends. And so I got to see a side of him that was, just extraordinary. Very quiet man, actually quite quietly spoken. I don't know if you obviously know how he spoke as well. Even when he did speak, it was quite difficult to understand what he was saying. Particularly when the television was up so loud. One of his great loves in life was watching westerns and his favourite films on television. But he was a joy to be around. He was an example to us all. If I could be half as compassionate and kind as he was to people, I would feel very proud indeed.
Oh, Richard, a wonderful insight into the life and times of Shane McGowan, who has passed away at the age of 65. Thank you for coming on to the UK Tonight to remember him. Thank you.
Thank you.
Still to come on the programme. Tributes to the former Chancellor, Alistair Darling, who has died at the age of 70. Also ahead, rail workers from the RMT union accept a pay deal from the government, ending an 18-month campaign of strikes. And the council is forced to act in Greater Manchester after residents complained about this Christmas tree. So tonight we're asking, is this the country's worst?
I'm Martin Brunt, and I'm Sky's crime correspondent. My most memorable story was, and still is, the disappearance of Madeleine McCann.
Please, please do not hurt her. Please give our little girl back.
We aim to be the best and most trusted place for news.
For detectives, the first 48 hours after a murder are crucial in the search for clues. The public expects them to find Jill Dando's killer soon. The British detectives are planning to meet forensic experts, academics, and even witch doctors.
I remember the grimmest case, the Sower murders of schoolgirls Holly and Jessica. I felt I can't undo what's happened, but I can help explain it.
Ian Huntley was arrested and charged within a fortnight of the murders.
I've never murdered anyone. I've never raped anyone. What am I in jail for?
The parole board has to decide if Bronson needs to be kept locked up for the safety of the public. My biggest challenge was to persuade a jailed diamond thief to answer my letters. Martin Brunt, Sky News at the Old Bailey.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching the UK Tonight. Here's what's coming up. We go inside a Just Stop Oil training camp. Sky News has been given exclusive access as new recruits are taught how to protest. And a final farewell to the UK's only giant pandas as they prepare for their long journey back to China. Yellow warnings for snow and ice remain in place tonight. Temperatures set to drop well below freezing. This time of year, the issue of rough sleeping is brought into sharp focus. And as the number of rough sleepers continues to rise, new figures out today have laid bare the scale of this hidden homeless emergency. Sky's Fraser Moore joins me now from Pickering in North Yorkshire. Fraser, just give us a snapshot of what life is like for people at the moment.
Well, here in North Yorkshire, it's a case of waiting for the snow to come. We're in the yellow warning zone here. There are 3 yellow warnings put in place by the Met Office, one for snow and ice. That stretches from Shetland all the way down through northern Scotland, right down the east coast of England, a pretty narrow band. Down the coastal areas of England, down as far as sort of south of Suffolk and into parts of Essex as well. That's in place until 11 o'clock tomorrow, and then there are a couple of yellow ice warnings in place, one down in the southwest, Cornwall and the rest of southwest England, and in Northern Ireland as well. They're both in place until 10 o'clock tomorrow. At the moment, about 0 degrees here in Pickering. It's expected to drop down to about -2 tonight. Colder tomorrow, although there's less threat of snow tomorrow. It's expected to get down to about -5 tomorrow night. But the snow's been coming in patches and in showers, really. Earlier on today, we're up in Hayington, near Darlington. Large snowflakes falling, quite a heavy snowfall there, but it only lasted about 10 minutes or so. And I think that's what people have been seeing, these bands of snow just coming down that east coast region and in the north part of the country, and sort of doing a bit of laying snow for short periods of time and then pretty much moving away. So we're getting snow in bands throughout the evening tonight. In terms of what the power companies are doing, they are introducing what they call a demand flexibility service from Power Grid, which means that basically people with smart meters are being encouraged not to use their electricity between 4:30 and 6 tomorrow evening, and if they do minimise their electricity use, then there are financial incentives for them to do so. So basically getting paid not to use electricity in that peak time when the Power Grid are saying that there could be concerns about the flow of electricity around the country. You mentioned the homelessness situation there. Obviously, homelessness a problem at any time of year, but particularly worrisome at this time of year, especially when we hear the new figures that have been released today. 2,993 new people sleeping rough over the month of September. That's 35% of the total people sleeping rough over the month. It's up 23% on the same period last year. And as we get into this cold slap now, where we're seeing the snows beginning to come in, seeing very low temperatures, as low as -6 in parts of Cumbria, -5.5 in parts of Scotland, cold again tomorrow night and cold through the weekend as well. Of course, there is real concern for anyone who is sleeping rough, and many councils, London included, Newcastle included, have introduced their severe weather emergency protocol, which makes sure that there should be beds available for anyone who is sleeping rough at this particularly cold time of year.
Fraser, thank you, Fraser Maud in North Yorkshire for us tonight. Well, let's take a look at some of the other stories making news in the UK tonight. The former Chancellor, Lord Darling, has died at the age of 70. The Labour politician was in number 11 at the time of the 2008 financial crisis. His family say he'd been receiving cancer treatment in Edinburgh. Former Prime Minister Gordon Brown led the tributes to Lord Darling, saying he relied on his wisdom, his calmness in a crisis and his humour. A distressing 999 call made by a dog walker who found the body of transgender teen Brianna Jai has been played to the jury at her murder trial. New footage has also emerged of Brianna boarding a bus on the day that she was stabbed 28 times in a park near Warrington in February. The two teenagers charged with her death have both pleaded not guilty. Members of the RMT union have voted overwhelmingly to accept a deal to end their strike action on the railways. The RMT, alongside other transport unions, have been engaged in a bitter row over pay and conditions for more than 18 months. The new agreement sees RMT members given a backdated pay rise and job security guarantees. The vote ends industrial action until at least the spring. Now, a council in Greater Manchester has been forced to act after residents of a housing estate slammed what they believe to be the worst Christmas tree in the country. It's not even December. Well, the tree was planted on Stockport Road in Hattersley, and it was adorned with lights and a barrier put around it ahead of a big switch on. Residents said they were outraged at the shocking state of the tree. There it is in all its glory. Council officials have now stepped in and replaced it. So we want to know, is it really the worst Christmas tree in the UK? As I said, it's not even December yet. Many of them popping up around the UK as we speak. Get in touch and let me know what your local one looks like, weird or wonderful. You can tweet me at Sky Sarah-Jane. Now, visitors to Edinburgh Zoo have said a final farewell to the UK's only giant pandas. Tian Tian and Yang Yang arrived at the zoo more than a decade ago as part of a 10-year loan deal with China. Well, that agreement was extended for an extra 2 years, but now it is time for the pandas to embark on their long journey back home. Sky's Scotland correspondent Conor Gillis has more.
They are very round and cute.
They have been the star of the show for more than a decade.
Oh, wow. Lovely.
But the curtain is coming down one last time for Edinburgh's most famous duo.
The pandas have been here for longer than you've been alive, and they're going home today. How do you feel about that?
I feel sad. I was sitting last night and it popped up on Facebook that the pandas were going, and it was the last chance to see them today, so miss school. I'll be getting wrong.
How far did you come? How long did it take you?
About an hour and a half on the train. So we booked train tickets about 9 o'clock last night.
You've got the toy, you're here, you're raring to go.
Yes, we're here to see the pandas. Last day today, so my wee one here is obsessed with pandas.
Tian Tian and Yang Guan touched down in 2011 amid a rock star welcome. A costly loan from China, with Edinburgh Zoo forking out $1 million a year. There were high hopes of producing the pitter-patter of tiny paws, but the headline act didn't mate. Relentless attempts of artificial insemination failed.
We never had cubs here, but we've learnt so much more. We've engaged with them. Our visitors have come and seen them. They've played a huge part here at the zoo on the work that RZSS does for conservation around the world.
As crowds here bid their final farewell, these pandas have been blissfully unaware that they have been headline news across the world since they arrived. But animal rights campaigners do believe that attitudes among the public have changed in the last few years, with people now thinking twice about coming to view these creatures in captivity.
These animals may not have found love on their Scottish honeymoon, but for now, as was always the plan, they'll jet off into the sunset together, heading home on a cosy private plane. Connor Gillis, Sky News, Edinburgh.
Still to come on the UK Tonight, I'm going to speak to the Team GB athlete misdiagnosed as bipolar about neurodiversity in sports. And we get exclusive access to the Just Stop Oil training camps, giving new recruits the tools to protest. Hello, welcome back. Now, 8 years ago, Team GB rower Cara McMurry was wrongly diagnosed with bipolar disorder, and she spent 5 years taking medication, feeling labelled and seeing her athletic performance decline. Eventually, She was referred to UK Sport's mental health panel and re-diagnosed with high-functioning autism. Cara was gradually taken off medication and she saw a big improvement in her mental and physical health. She was selected for the Olympics and won a medal at the World Cup. And now she wants to do whatever she can to improve the understanding of neurodiversity in sport and make sure no one else goes through what she experienced. Well, Cara joins me now in the studio alongside Dr. Amanda Gather, a clinical psychologist on the mental health expert panel at the UK Sports Institute. Ladies, good evening to you. Cara, what a journey you have been on. First of all, talk to me about the original diagnosis. Talk to me about how you were feeling and what happened.
Yeah, so I guess quickly, firstly, I was a very successful junior and under-23 athlete, and I really attribute that to my autistic characteristics. I came from a state school background. It's quite unusual in rowing. But then when I was kind of drawn into a centralised system, it was quite a one-size-fits-all model. I really struggled because I was different, and my way of doing things and me being at my best needed to look different to other people. And I think stretching to try and fit that mould, I had to stretch quite far, probably a bit further than a lot of other people. That really took it out of me mentally, physically. And I kept sort of burning out, basically. And that was when I ended up, you know, seeing the doctor and being misdiagnosed and mismedicated. And then in terms of the medication, it developed over the years. It was just once you are on that train and you have that label and you have that original medication, it's if things aren't going well, it's add more, try something new, add this. And in the end, I was on a lot of medication, yeah.
And it got to a point where something had to give. You felt so bad. And where did you go for help then? Because you ended up at Amanda's door. Talk to me about what point you got to seek more help, because you knew something wasn't right.
Yeah, I knew that, like, my performance was going down the drain and also my well-being. Yeah. And I was doing, it didn't make sense because I was putting more effort in than ever. I was covering all the 1%ers. I was doing everything I could. I had no more, like, I was problem solving all the time, and I couldn't see any other avenue to go down. And I reached out to, there was a new performance director at the time who I believed him when he said he was very person-centred, and he put me in touch with the newly formed UK Sport Mental Health Panel. And Amanda was one of the members of that panel, and they really looked at me as a person and not just as a label and not just as a problem or someone who was difficult or different. And that was completely revolutionary.
Amanda, the good news is that people are talking about neurodiversity more. More people are coming forward saying, I feel different, I need help. And there's, you know, no shame or stigma attached in doing that, and there are places for people to go. But it's getting the right diagnosis, isn't it? The fact that it's being talked about. Is the help advancing quickly enough to recognise, you know, the differences that people have and how they can be helped adequately?
I think it's good that it's advancing. Neurodiversity is being talked about more and more in high-performance sport and high-performance environments, and obviously the work that Cara's now doing is really strongly influencing that. I think the most important thing is getting the right assessment. Yeah. Not so much where it takes you, but the understanding that you get through an assessment of what your strengths are, what your needs are, how the environment has to perhaps adapt to get the best out of you and for you to get the best out of it. I would say the assessment is the most important bit. And yes, sometimes that might lead to a diagnosis and that might lead to other kinds of support. But for me, it's the assessment. And that was, I think, the bit that perhaps Cara got the most out of, was just actually we've come at this with a different lens.
Yeah. Cara, you're now working really hard to sort of make sport inclusive for those who are neurodiverse. And do you feel, in a way, if you had been identified as having high-functioning autism in the beginning, it would have helped you more? Because it's almost as if you were saying in the early part of your career, your autism actually helped you. You thrived in the environment you created for yourself. You just needed to recognise that and it be adapted when you went into team rowing and into a different environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I think partly it's the understanding that I got from the diagnosis, and like Amanda says, a diagnosis isn't a be-all and end-all. It's
just a way of understanding.
It's a way of understanding. It guides you to, like, a place in a library. Then you have to pick the books that are relevant to you. That's kind of the way that I see it. But also it takes the environment to be flexible and to adapt and to support you as well. So it's twofold. I think if I was diagnosed earlier, maybe I would have understood myself better, but that's not to say that the environment would have understood me. So potentially it would have held me back, actually. So I think that's why, you know, with neurodiverse sport, it's about raising awareness and giving people the tools that they need to look after themselves and to be more aware, but also it's encouraging sports teams and organisations to do the same and to support a more diverse range of people.
Yeah, I think, Amanda, you summed it up perfectly when you said, you know, a correct diagnosis, it helps to get the best out of people. And when you talk about sport being accessible and open and understanding to those who are neurodivergent, what do you mean? It doesn't have to be big changes, does it? It can be small tweaks, whether it be to a routine or, you know, how you interact with them. Talk us through what can be done, because, like I said, it doesn't have to be massive.
It doesn't, and some of the things we're doing at the moment collaboratively with neurodiverse sport are around helping coaches, for example, to understand how does this athlete best learn? How do I best communicate with the athlete so that they can actually thrive on the advice and the support I'm giving them? So it's about communication skills, it's about understanding from the athlete what does the environment need to look like? How do we need to adapt the environment to make sure that you're comfortable in it and that you're able to actually focus on what's important for your performance? So it is about skills, awareness, and again, the work that neurodiverse sport are doing is really helping to progress that.
How much work needs to be done, Cara? Are you pushing an open door here?
Actually, I feel like I've just been lighting fires in different places. But, you know, maybe a year ago I would have said, like, there's loads of work needs to be done. But I really do think over the last year there has been a massive shift in awareness. And people do get, like, and I think people are receptive because ultimately, in every organisation, there will be a good proportion of people who themselves are neurodivergent. So I think they're really, like, leading the charge. And I've been pleasantly surprised at how receptive people are.
That is a great note to end the interview on. Thank you so much, and good luck with the work you're doing. And Amanda, thank you for coming in as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Now, Just Stop Oil protesters have said that they do not feel guilty about the disruption that they've been causing to the public during their demonstrations. Sky News has joined a training session with the environmentalist group where new recruits are taught how to deadweight themselves and deal with the public screaming at them. Sky's Rachel Venables has been given exclusive access, but I should warn you that her report does contain some flash photography. Here it is.
Go. What the is this?
This is a role play.
Who the hell do you think you are? What gives you the right to stand on the road? I'm trying to get to hospital.
It's also a pretty good example of the fury Just Stop Oil receive from the public when they march.
Before anyone can go out with Just Stop Oil, they first have to take part in a day-long non-violent training session. And what's happening behind me right now is a role-play exercise. They are practising slow marching, that technique which has brought parts of London to a standstill, causing a huge headache for both the police and the public.
To date, they've cost the police more than £18.5 million. This lesson is where they learn tricks like going floppy to make arrests harder and how to stay calm in tense situations.
So remember that they're human and recognise that humanity in them. Don't just see them as the angry driver or the upset person.
They were also shown footage from past protests where members of the public became violent.
People are getting shoved there, but those people aren't pushing back. They're just rolling, we're being pushed, they're letting themselves be pushed, and then just walking back into place.
So would the potential recruits feel guilty about causing this disruption for real?
I don't feel guilty about stopping people going to work.
The current cost of living crisis?
Well, I mean, I think it's it's a scale, isn't it?
What gives you the right to say, well, I can disrupt somebody else because I think this cause is more important?
Because to me, it's quite a big thing.
And for this group, tackling climate change matters more than anything else.
It doesn't matter if it's a hospital appointment or if they're just trying to go shopping, you know, people have a right to live their lives.
If non-disruptive protests worked, we would be doing that. It's not a sort of we're doing it because it's fun or because we just want to disrupt people's day. We're doing this because we desperately need the government to change its policy. And if it doesn't change its policy, we're going to see even more disruption.
Since Just Stop Oil started, the only real legal change has been the strengthening of police powers over protesters. And many believe these stunts only damage the climate cause. But it's clear there are still those prepared to join them for the first time as they vow to carry on. Rachel Venables, Sky News.
Coming up on the UK tonight, is this the worst Christmas tree in the UK? We're going to go live to Hattersley, Greater Manchester, where the council there has been forced to act after residents complained. And Tiger Woods is back on the golf course. We'll hear about his latest comeback next.
I heard the fire alarms go off, and one of the guys, the banksman on the ground, said, this is not a fire drill, this is evacuate everyone out, and there's a fire on level 8. I was concreting at the time, and I looked out my left window and I could see the smoke, so I just hoisted up and slewed round to put the concrete skip on the ground. And they said, yeah, you have to come out the crane as well. So I got the skip off and my chains, and I started hoisting up, and I slew back round, and I looked out my left window, and as I looked out my left window, one of the guys on the ground shouted out, there's a guy on level 8. And I stopped what I was doing, and I looked out on level 8 where he was, and he was waving his coat.
And you could see the area where he was standing. You knew he didn't have that much space.
No, he had about 2 metres. He was standing on about 2 square metres there. That wasn't alight. So, and when I touched down the cage, there was materials on the floor. So the cage started to tilt a little bit. Yeah, and the wind caught the block then, and it started pulling the cage over. I thought, no, lucky it came back. And then I heard the cage go down, and then the banksman said, he's in. So, then I heard the crowd outside, they were all shouting as well, I could hear all that as well. So, yeah, and then up and away, pulled the lever right back as fast as I could, get him out of there.
You're in the right place the right time in terms of you were in your cab, but you were told to evacuate it, but you heard that someone was there, so you stayed in. And like you said, you've done that manoeuvre many times.
Yeah, I've been on that level before, yeah.
But from what you're saying, you were operating blind, you and your man on the ground worked together.
Yeah.
What was that like? What were the nerves like?
The adrenaline was out the roof. Like I can't tell you. You know, when I got him back on the ground, put him back on the ground safely, and the ambulance staff was there. Yeah, they took him away, and they took my hooks off, and I blocked up and everything, got the crane safe, and I just stood up, and I was shaky as hell.
Hello, welcome back. Coming up, we are going to go live to Hattersley, which is in Greater Manchester. Residents there believe they have the worst Christmas tree in the UK, which is quite a claim. It's not even December. A lot of them haven't gone up yet. But we'll let you be the judge of it in just a few moments' time. But first, David is here with the sport. Has your tree gone up yet?
No, I'm poor at this. Really bad Christmas game at the moment. Needs to up it. 1st December tomorrow. Do you know what? I'm not a fan of, like, as soon as Halloween is done, you know, you get on with Christmas. I prefer to start in December, but 1st December tomorrow, not there yet.
Yeah, come on, catch up.
Yeah,
right, let's catch up with Tiger Woods, shall we? Big comeback happened today. How did he do?
Well, he's still out on the course at the moment. He's 3 over par. That's 8 shots off the leaders. This is at the Hero World Challenge. It's his first event since he withdrew from the Masters. He had surgery on his ankle. He's been sort of offered the other 3 majors, and he's come back again. And this is, I'd expect what, you know, you might hope for Tiger was just to be able to last the round, and because it's a 20-man field and there's no cut, what you'd hope is that he can just have 4 regular rounds, just play 72 holes of golf over 4 days and let the body absorb that. So that's what you're hoping for Tiger. But it has been an up and down round. So he's eight shots off the lead, 4 birdies, 5 bogeys and a double bogey as well. But one of the birdies is one of my favourite sporting phrases, monster birdie putt from 50 foot. Anything over 40 foot, it's got to be monster, right? 50-foot birdie putt and he sank it. And, you know, that just gives you that little hope that Tiger can produce those moments.
A monster birdie putt. Have you had a bet with another Sky Sports presenter that you can sneak that in air? Yeah, I think
not that difficult in this context,
yeah, very
though.
true.
Yeah.
Is there any chance we can see Tiger challenge for another major? Because I think, well, I was going to say that's the golf fans' big hope. That's definitely his as well, surely.
Yeah, look, I think it's just how much can his body take? Because he was talking about this injury and saying his ankle now, he feels no pain whatsoever, but it's just that the rest of his body in the adjacent parts has to kind of adapt and, I suppose, compensate, has to become, as he called it, hypermobile. He's really looked into it. He's got into the kind of nerdy stuff with his injuries. Look, the last major he won was in 2019, the Masters, and that was 11 years after his last previous major. He's got 15 in total. So never say never, but really it's just a case of when his body just eventually says no more, no more. But for the moment, he's back out on the course.
Yeah. Final question, and you probably haven't got the answer to that, but I was thinking about this the other day. Why does he keep going? He's such an icon, and his body has taken such a lot of pain because of injuries. To keep coming back and for those challenges for majors to be in doubt and to be constantly talked about. You wonder why he puts himself through it.
Well, the only reason I can imagine is just that elite athlete hunger and the point to proof, because people have written him off so many times for various reasons, you know, the car crash that, you know, he suffered such horrendous injuries from, etc. So, you know, I think that ultimately he still has that hunger. He still wants to prove people wrong. If he can win one more, maybe the Masters again, then maybe that would be sufficient compensation to say, right,
maybe that would all be worth it.
OK. It's done, it's done. But look, we'll keep an eye on Tiger, and we're also keeping an eye on the night's European action.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
John, welcome to Old Trafford.
Thanks very much.
You're a man of many talents, but we're interested in you today for one major reason.
Okay.
Season ticket holder at Manchester United, and you told me you're in the where?
I believe I'm in the E of Manchester, towards the back of that bottom tier there. Every time I sort of do a job or sign on to something, I always think, well, at least that's my season tickets secured for another season. It's always my priority. I'd hate to be without it.
And you have any recollection of that, the first time you actually walked through the steps or the pitch, saw the players?
Oh, I just couldn't believe it. I've got very, very clear memories of that game. It was New Year's Day, 2003, and we played Sunderland at Old Trafford, and it was kind of the perfect first game to go to, really. That was in the era when we had Scholesy starting, and we had Beckham starting, we had Keano starting, and I just couldn't believe that I was seeing them all of a sudden.
So this is David Beckham asking you for a picture. Look how happy he is to be posing with you.
I know. and the weird thing about it was that, you know, David Beckham's not somebody who maintains a look for very long. I don't know how long he kept that for, but I remember the first time I saw him, on this pitch down there was his sort of 2003 long blonde hair phase. So the fact that when I met him, he had a similar look going on. It was just like he'd walked out. He was like he'd walked off my bedroom wall. And then the cutest thing was, probably about a year later, I met Brooklyn at a thing.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Right, let's have a look at the weather now.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, it's cold all week. Overnight frost, fog and a risk of snow and ice in places. Largely dry tonight, but northern and eastern coast will see some wintry showers. There's also going to be patchy rain, sleet and hill snow across the extreme south of England with strong winds for the southwest. That wintry mix will soon fade away, but showers are going to continue near exposed coasts overnight, bringing icy stretches. Elsewhere, mostly dry and clear with an extensive frost, but some low cloud and fog is going to develop. Fog slow to lift in parts of central, southern and eastern England tomorrow morning, but elsewhere there's going to be plenty of sunshine. Most places are looking dry, but Western Ireland, northern and western Scotland, West Wales and eastern England will see wintry showers near the coast. Just a few will spread inland across southeast England. It's going to be cold again, especially where that fog lingers, but less windy for the southwest. The afternoon, little overall change, with most places staying fine. Saturday, similar.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Now, we do like to leave you with something weird or wonderful on the UK tonight. And residents of a town in Greater Manchester have forced their local council to act over what they believe is the worst Christmas tree in the country. Well, this is the tree in question. What do you think? It's in Hattersley. It's a living tree that the council planted a few years ago. Well, they did put some lights on it and a barrier around it, as you can see, ahead of what they build as the big switch on, which I think is this. But residents complained. The council forced to act, supplying a cut tree instead. A councillor did make the point on social media that there's no budget for Christmas decorations, but they are always keen to work with residents to make things better. Well, some of you have sent in your local Christmas tree, so thank you for that. Ashley Briggs getting in touch. She says, hi, SJ. This is the tree on the village green in Yaxley, where I live. Teenagers a few nights ago tried to climb her, so now it's being guarded by a postbox knitted Santa topper. And Trevor Pateman says, how does this compare? Oh, that's a beautiful tree. Thank you for that, Trevor. And this is my local tree. Hurst Green in East Sussex. Went up overnight. Got a snap of it this morning as I came into work. I think that looks pretty good. It's got presents hanging off it. It looks better when it's lit, I promise you. Big fan of a local Christmas tree. Keep them coming in at Sky Sarah-Jane on social media. Oh, that's all from the UK tonight. Highlights on the webpage. We'll see you Monday at 8.